Hey folks, welcome to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking about top quilts versus sleeping bags. But really, is this even a debate anymore? I know for me, I've been using a top quilt now for the past 6-7 years on my backpacking trips, and not once have I ever thought about returning back to using a sleeping bag. However, I do think there are a couple of situations where a sleeping bag is better than a top quilt, and we'll get into that. But more importantly, I think I have found the perfect sleep system that's a good balance between the two that meets all my needs. Let's get to it. For me, it's a no-brainer when choosing between a top quilt and a sleeping bag. Because if all things are equal, if you have the same temperature rating, the same fill, the same fabric, the same length and width of your sleep system, the top quilt is always going to be lighter than the sleeping bag simply because it has less material. And I will always choose the lighter option if I'm getting the same functionality. But when I went on my first backpacking trip with a hammock, I used this Mummy sleeping bag. It is the Outdoor Adventure Mountaintop. I didn't bring an underquilt. I didn't bring a sleeping pad because I thought that this 32-degree bag would be plenty enough to keep me warm during the night. Now the temperatures were only supposed to drop down into maybe the upper 40s, probably the lower 50s, and I thought I would be fine. And that's when I quickly learned the lesson that when you compress the down, it loses its ability to retain heat and keep you warm. So I was warm, very warm on top, but underneath I froze my butt off. And that's when I quickly realized that I'm going to need something else underneath me to keep me warm when I'm sleeping in a hammock that a sleeping bag just isn't going to do. However, through experience, I have learned that there is one situation where I prefer a sleeping bag over a quilt, and that's when I use a sleeping pad. Now, for those of you who follow the channel know that I prefer an underquilt over a sleep pad. I think an underquilt just gives me better coverage, keeps me warmer during the night, and is just a more comfortable option for me when I sleep in my hammock. But there are times when I will use a sleep pad in my hammock. So if I'm planning a trip and it looks like it might be iffy that I'm going to have good trees for hanging a hammock at that campsite, then I'll bring a sleep pad. And this is rare. I don't do this too often, but I want to, in some cases, I want to be ready to go to the ground if I can't find trees. If I think there is, again, if it could be an iffy situation. So I'll bring that sleep pad. So in case if I don't find trees, then I can easily go to the ground and sleep on that pad. And I'll pitch my tarp basically like a tent, and I'll be good for the night. So I rarely do use a sleeping pad, but it does happen. So why do I think that a sleeping bag is a better option than a top quilt when sleeping on a pad? Well, the one flaw that I have found with the top quilt is that it doesn't prevent cold drafts up around my shoulders and my neck. And I really realized this when I was backpacking the Colorado Trail, and I had a section of trail where I was going to be above tree line, and I didn't bring my hammock. I brought my tent because I knew I'd have to go to the ground most of the nights. So I went ahead and brought my tent, and I brought my sleep pad, my Nemo Tensor, which I love, fantastic pad, and I brought a top quilt with me. Well, the temperatures were dropping, 15, 20 degrees. I was at high elevation for several days. And that's when I noticed that these these drafts keep coming in, right? Because the quilt is like a blanket. So my feet were fine because I have a foot box, but it spreads out at the top. And mine, I can button mine up to the top. I even have a cinch cord around my neck. But what I found is that that still didn't keep me completely enclosed. There were still pockets of cold air that were stealing my heat from me underneath my quilt. And this really isn't a big deal if you're in warmer temperatures. I mean, because really, I love the quilt because it helps me regulate my body temperature. I can kick out my foot, I can kick out a leg if I get too hot. So in warmer temperatures, this is not a problem. This is really only when I'm sleeping on a pad and I think the temperatures are going to be in the 40s or below because I'll start feeling those cold drafts. And that's why I think the sleeping bag is a better option because even though you're compressing it, you'll still sleep on your pad, so you'll have the warmth underneath you, but you're completely enclosed, especially that mummy bag, that I showed you earlier. My shoulders are enclosed, my head is enclosed, and so it's going to eliminate all those drafts and I'm going to sleep warmer in the night. So for me, if I feel like that I'm going to have to use my pad and that the temperatures are going to be in the 40s or below, I'm more than likely going to bring a sleeping bag in order to prevent those drafts, right? Because even if I am in my hammock and I'm sleeping on a pad, those drafts are still there. And that's the beauty of the underquilt. The underquilt just completely wraps around your shoulders and your head and keeps you warm everywhere. That's why I only need a top quilt. I'm not worried about my shoulders or my neck because my underquilt is keeping that warm. So that's the one situation where I feel like a sleeping bag is better than the top quilt, is if I'm sleeping on a pad and the temperatures are really going to get low that night and I want to be able to eliminate those cold drafts. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a sleep system that had the advantages of a top quilt where it kept you warm on top as well as giving you the ability of regulating your temperature by sticking your leg out, your foot out, and acting more like a sheet, as well as the advantage of a sleeping bag that can help eliminate some of those drafts that come in through your sides and your shoulder. Well, I think I have found that sleep system. This is the Zenbivy sleep system. So let's go see how this works. The Zenbivy system comes with two parts. The first is your normal top quilt. So this is the 25-degree rated top quilt. It's the long and wide version. And anytime that I get a quilt, I like to get the long, wide version. Being 6 foot tall, I'd like a little extra room, and I'd also like it as wide because sometimes I do like to tuck it in on my sides, and that is always nice to have. So I got the long, wide version. The toe box for these are sewed, is a sewn in, but that's really nice. So this is a normal type of quilt. It's great. What is different is this second part, and this is a quilt sheet. So what this does, this wraps around your sleeping pad, and it has what I call, I don't know if this is the right name, a pillow barn. And there's a down loft in this, and so it keeps my pillow from moving around in the night. It stays in one place, and it keeps my head warm. So it's retaining all that heat with this down now on top of it, and it is keeping my head warm. But this attaches to the sleeping pad itself. So I'm going to break out my Nemo tensor, and I'm going to hook this up and then attach the quilt to it and show you how it works. So this is the sleeping pad that I will take with me if I'm using one. So if I'm either in a tent and sleeping on the ground, or on those, occasions where I need one in my hammock, this is the pad that I prefer. And it's the insulated Nemo Tensor, and it's the wide and long version. So for the width, it's 25 inches wide, which I like because that helps give me coverage over my shoulders. And I like the longer version of the pads. So I'm 6 feet tall, so I would like a pad that is longer than 72 inches. And I believe this is 78 or 79. So my feet aren't hanging off the pad when I sleep at night, which is great. So this pad, it's fantastic and I love it. So let's put on the sheet onto this pad. So here is the quilt sheet that you put on first. And what you'll notice is it has these little spots on the back that wrap around the corners of your sleeping pad. So that slips on there, and then that one slips onto there. All right, and then that's really it. Doesn't go all the way down. It does have a strap that goes underneath your pad. So that secures your sheet to the pad so it doesn't move around. And that's really it. So I still have an insulated pad, so my legs and feet are going to be warm underneath. The sheet doesn't need to go all the way down. I think that's how they saved a little bit. But then you have these draft covers on both sides. And you see that there's different colors on here, and they align with the quilt to help attach it to the sheet. All right, so let's get that. All right, so we have the Zenbivy quilt. Like I said, you see these little color-coded hooks on here, and then you just hook it on. All right. And you'll see it goes all the way up to what I called the pillow barn. So that means I now have complete coverage, because you'll see there's quilt here that's going underneath that draft collar. You can see that in there. So this keeps that quilt in place, and that is what eliminates the draft. And it comes all the way up to my pillow barn, which also is quilted as well. So I now have complete coverage from my head, shoulders, all the way to where I am using my quilt. And you do this on both sides. So you can see here, again, you have the different color codings, and you have the other draft collar on that to hook it up. But that is the Zenbivy system, and I really do think it is the perfect blend between having a top quilt as well as eliminating those drafts on the side like a sleeping bag. And so when I'm not using a sleeping pad, I'll just bring the top quilt. I don't need the sheet anymore, especially if I have that under quilt. This is going to do fine for me. So I like the fact that it is customizable to what type of camping that I'm going to do, whether I'm in a hammock or a tent, whether I'm using a pad or not. This seems to be an extremely flexible option for my sleep system, and I think it works great. All right, let's see this system in action with a hammock. So what I will typically do is I will secure one side of my quilt to the draft covers. I'll completely secure that up, and then I'll leave this other side open. And so that allows me to easily kind of get into my quilt, and then I'll button it up. Like that. And then I will slide my feet in the foot box. And there we have it. And then what I'll begin to do is take these little color coatings here and I will start lining them up with here. And then that will get me all snug and tight into my quilt. And there you have it. That's how I get into my Zenbivy sleep system and secure it up. And now I don't have to worry about drafts in the middle of the night. So the original question of this video was top quilt versus sleeping bag. Well, for me, I think it's a top quilt with a bit of a twist, and the Zenbivy adds that twist. I think that quilted sheet is the game changer for me, and it makes all the difference of the world. So I can use it as a top quilt only, and I get all the advantages of being able to help regulate my temperature by sticking my leg or foot out and keeping it open on the sides if it's warmer. But that quilted sheet now allows me to secure my quilt to those draft covers, and it completely eliminates the drafts on the sides of my quilt. Plus, you know, it has that pillow barn, so that draft cover goes all the way up to that pillow barn, and now my head is covered with quilted down, keeping me warm. My sides are covered, just like a mummy bag, but I have so much more room to move around. And that's why I think the Zenbivy sleep system, for me, is the perfect sleep system that can meet all of my needs. Because if my head is warm and my hands are warm and my feet are warm, then generally my whole body is going to be warm. And the Zenbivy sleep system helps me achieve that. Well, that's going to do it for this video. As you know, I am always in a constant pursuit of improving my hammock setup. So I would love to hear your comments, your experience with using top quilts versus sleeping bags, and what works best for you, especially from a hammock perspective. Thanks for watching.